The war had been going on for so long that Captain Yaren no longer remembered a time without it. Battles came and went like storms, loud, violent, and then forgotten by morning. Soldiers fought, soldiers died, new ones replaced them, and the endless struggle between the Alliance and the Krex Dominion continued without change. It was a routine. It's the same tactics, the same victories, the same defeats, all blending together into a gray, lifeless cycle. Yaren had grown used to it, thought nothing could surprise him anymore. But on that cold metal deck of the Alliance, frigate Vokrin, as the ship prepared for yet another skirmish, he noticed something different. A small group stood apart from the other soldiers. They weren't tall like the Varen warriors, nor did they have the insect-like armor of the Zelri. Scouts. Their armor looked scratched, dented, and mismatched. Their weapons seemed old and heavy, and yet every single one of them stood like a coiled spring, silent, eyes fixed ahead, as if they were staring at something far away. They were human. Humans had joined the Alliance only recently. Other species whispered that they were primitive compared to the advanced technology of the galaxy. They had no great fleets, no legendary warriors, no long history of interstellar conquest. Most saw them as little more than background troops useful in numbers, but nothing special. Yaren had never fought alongside them before. He expected them to be nervous, eager to prove themselves, maybe even afraid. But they were none of those things. Instead, there was something in their eyes, something unsettling. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even confidence. It was a deep simmering heat like a fire that had been burning for years and was now being aimed at a single target. The mission briefing was straightforward. Too straightforward. The Krex Dominion had taken control of an outpost on the barren moon of HFY. It was a small location, nothing strategically vital, but the Alliance needed to clear it to secure the surrounding sector. The plan was routine. The fleet would bombard the defenses, then ground troops would sweep in to finish the job. Yaren had done it 100 times before. The Krex would fight fiercely at first, but eventually they'd retreat, regroup, and the war would continue elsewhere. Nothing about this operation should have been unusual. And yet as the briefing ended, Yaren caught one of the humans, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, smiling faintly. Not the kind of smile a soldier gives before battle, but the kind of smile someone gives when they've been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The drop to the moon was rough. HFY's surface was covered in jagged stone ridges, and endless dust storms that turned the air into a swirling, choking haze. The Krex had fortified the outpost well, their black spires rising out of the ground like claws. The Alliance troops moved forward in disciplined formation, just as they always did. Yaren stayed with his squad, checking weapon readouts and relaying orders. The humans were assigned to the flank, silent as they moved, their heavy boots crunching. Over the loose rock, not one of them spoke over the coms. Not one of them glanced around nervously. It was as if they had already walked this path in their minds 100 times. When the Krex opened fire, the sky lit up with plasma bolts and railgun streaks. Alliance soldiers took cover, returning fire in steady, measured bursts. Yaren focused on his section, keeping the lines tight, making sure no one advanced too far. That was the way of the Alliance calculated moves, minimal risk, slow advances. But then, out of the corner of his eye, Yaren saw something that broke the pattern. A human soldier, the scarred man, broke formation, without hesitation. He charged forward into the storm of enemy fire. Yaren almost shouted for him to stop, but before he could, 2 more humans followed, then the rest of the squad. They moved fast, low, and with a purpose that didn't seem reckless at all. It seemed inevitable. The Krex adjusted fire toward them, but the humans didn't slow. They used the terrain like they had been born on this world. Darting from cover to cover, closing the distance with terrifying speed. When they reached the first enemy barricade, they didn't just shoot, they tore through it, pushing forward with a fury Yaren had never seen in any other species. And as the Krex line faltered, something else happened. The rest of the Alliance troops, inspired or perhaps shocked, began to advance faster than planned. The carefully measured assault had turned into a sudden, overwhelming push. Minutes later, the first Krex position was gone. the humans didn't stop. They pressed forward, forcing the Kreks to abandon the second and third lines of defense in a matter of minutes. Yarn moved up with his squad, still trying to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just bravery. This wasn't just skill. This was something else, something raw, something dangerous. The Kreks weren't retreating because of superior firepower. They were retreating because of fear. When the last enemy position fell, the battlefield went quiet, except for the crackle of fires and the distant rumble of retreating Kreks engines. Yaren stood in the dust, his armor scorched and his pulse racing, staring at the humans as they regrouped. They didn't cheer. They didn't exchange congratulations. They simply checked their weapons, reloaded, and looked toward the horizon, as if this small victory meant nothing compared to what lay ahead. For the first time in years, Captain Yaren felt something he hadn't felt since his first day in uniform: uncertainty. The war had always been predictable. But now, with the humans in it, he wasn't sure what was coming next. All he knew was that it would not be routine. Not anymore. The Kreks didn't take long to respond. The morning after the battle on HFY, the Valkyrin's sensors picked up heavy movement, multiple Kreks warships entering the sector at high speed. It was exactly what the Alliance command had expected. That was the Kreks way: retaliate quickly, strike hard, make the enemy regret ever touching their territory. Yaren knew the routine. The Alliance would fall back to a defensive line, trade fire until the Kreks got bored or overextended, then retreat to safety. Another cycle in the endless war. But this time, the humans didn't retreat. They were gathered in the hangar, preparing for something Yaren didn't understand. Their leader, the scarred man from the previous battle, stood in the center, quietly giving instructions. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that made even the seasoned Alliance Marines listen without interruption. Yaren couldn't hear everything, but he caught words like "cut deep," "don't stop," and "make them remember." It didn't sound like a defensive strategy. It sounded like an attack plan. When the Krek ships dropped out of warp, the battle began. Immediately, the Alliance fleet formed its shield wall, heavy cruisers in the front, carriers behind. The Kreks answered with their usual swarm tactics, dozens of smaller craft darting in to punch holes in the defense. The air inside the Valkyrin was filled with the deep rumble of cannons and the sharp beeps of warning systems. Yaren's squad was stationed at a gun battery, firing controlled bursts into the dark void. The battle seemed evenly matched, routine, predictable, then the humans. Launched, their dropships didn't wait for the Kreks to come to them. They punched straight through the defensive wall. Engines screaming, weaving between plasma fire like it didn't exist. Yaren had seen brave pilots before, but this wasn't bravery. This was personal. Humans weren't just trying to win. They were trying to break something deep inside their enemy. The Kreks fighters moved to intercept, but the humans flew as if every maneuver had already been decided before the battle began. Wiresome quotes come crackled with an open. Channel human voices shouting quick, sharp commands. Left, push forward. They're breaking. It wasn't the cold, calculated tone of the Alliance. It was wild, alive, full of heat. And it was working. The humans didn't stop at disabling the Kreks fighters. They went for the heart of the enemy fleet. One dropship smashed into the side of a Kreks destroyer, not with explosives, but with soldiers. They breached the hull and flooded the corridors in seconds. Yaren watched on the tactical display as one red blip after another, Kreks positions, vanished. The humans weren't just killing, they were dismantling, moving from deck to deck like a storm tearing through a city. The Kreks responded with desperation, redirecting entire squadrons to deal with the boarding parties. That's when the second human wave struck. From behind, no one in the Alliance fleet had even seen the second dropship slip away during the chaos. They hit the Kreks command ship directly, tearing through its shields with concentrated fire before docking. Moments later, the flagship's weapons went silent. Without their command vessel, the Kreks formation began to fracture, and still, the humans didn't stop. The battle, which should have dragged on for hours, ended in less than 40 minutes. The Kreks weren't just beaten, they were humiliated. Their fleet scattered, leaving wreckage burning in the void. The Alliance fleet had suffered minimal losses, something unheard of in engagements like this. when the last enemy blip vanished from the display, the Valkyrie's bridge was silent. No cheers, no celebration. Everyone was staring at the same thing Yaren was, the humans returning to their ships. Their armor was scorched, their faces streaked with grime, but their eyes still burned with that same deep fire. They had won, but it didn't look like victory to them. It looked like the first step in something much bigger. Yaren realized something that made the back of his neck tighten. The Krex had been a problem for decades. Every alliance race had fought them and learned to adapt to their style of war. But the humans weren't adapting. They were changing the game entirely. And if the Krex feared them now, it was nothing compared to what was coming next. Somewhere deep in the Krex home system, Yaren thought, someone must be looking at the battle reports and asking a single question. What happens when these humans decide they want more than just defense? The Krex did not sleep on their defeat. Within hours of the battle, their war councils were in emergency session. No one in the Alliance could hear their private transmissions, but Yaren knew the Krex well enough to guess what was being said. Honor had been stained. Pride had been wounded. And in Krex culture, wounds like that demanded repayment in blood. The Alliance command believed the enemy would take weeks to prepare a counterstrike. That was how wars had always gone. A battle, a pause, a regroup. But the humans didn't share that assumption. While other species relaxed into the fragile calm, the humans began moving with purpose. They studied battle logs, rearmed their ships, and repaired holes at a speed that seemed almost impossible. To them, the war wasn't paused. It was already continuing, only now the clock was ticking louder. 2 days later, the Krex made their move. Yaren was on the Valkyrie's observation deck when the first sensor alarm screamed. For enemy fleets, not squadrons, fleets dropped out of warp, surrounding the Alliance defensive sector like jaws closing around prey. Their formation was tight, disciplined, and deadly. In the center of it all was a warship Yaren had never seen before, larger than any Krex vessel on record. It was bristling with weapons and carried an energy signature so powerful it made the Valkyrie's shielding systems flicker just from the readings. The Valkyrie's captain ordered an immediate defensive alignment. Alliance cruisers and frigates scrambled into position, forming overlapping shields to absorb the first wave. But the Krex didn't fire right away. Instead, their flagship sent a single message across open channels, translated into the basic Alliance language, "We come for." The humans. Yaren felt a chill run down his spine. The Krex weren't hiding their intent. They wanted revenge on one species, and they wanted everyone else to step aside. That was a problem because Yaren had seen what the humans could do when they were targeted. The first shots came without warning, massive plasma bolts screaming through the void, smashing into the Alliance wall. Shields flared and cracked, hull plating shuddered, and the black space between fleets filled with fire and debris. Krex strike craft swarmed forward like hornets, bypassing larger ships to head straight for the human contingents. But the humans didn't fall back. They surged forward to meet the swarm head-on. Dropships launched in tight groups, cutting through enemy lines and surgical arcs. They didn't even try to match the Krex in numbers. They moved with the precision of predators. Every maneuver was designed to punch through and keep going, never getting bogged down in defense. On the tactical display, Yaren watched as one human dropship veered dangerously close to the Krex flagship, weaving through a storm of fire. The ship took hit after hit, armor glowing red from heat, but it kept going until it slammed into the enemy hull. The boarding clamps locked, and in seconds, the Krex flagship's external guns began going dark, one by one. The Krex countered with something new. From the belly of their super warship, they released massive boarding drones, hulking, insect-like. Machines with claws sharp enough to tear through metal. They latched onto human ships and began cutting their way in. The Valkyrie's crew fought desperately to repel them, corridors turning into battlefields where plasma fire lit the shadows. Yaren found himself in one of those corridors, blaster in hand, firing at a drone that refused to die until its entire core was melted down. Somehow, through the chaos, the humans pushed deeper into the Krex flagship. Explosions rattled its frame, and parts of its massive structure began to crumble. Then came a moment that froze Yarn where he stood. A cum feed from the human strike leader came online. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Control room. Secured? We have the heart. Seconds later, the Krex flagship's weapons went silent, its engines faltered. The massive warship drifted in space, powerless. The rest of the Krex fleet hesitated, their formation breaking for just a moment. In war, a moment is all the humans needed. They tore into the scattered Krex ships, forcing a retreat yet again. But this victory didn't feel like the last one. Yarn could feel the weight of it. The Krex had come with overwhelming force, and the humans had still found a way to win. That meant the enemy wouldn't stop now, they couldn't. And somewhere, deep in the Krex homeworld, Yarn imagined their leaders asking themselves a terrifying question. If this is human defense, what does human wrath truly look like? The galaxy had seen human courage before. It had seen their stubbornness, their refusal to break under pressure. But what was about to happen was different. This wasn't courage. This wasn't stubbornness. This was wrath. The Valkyrin floated. In the eerie silence after the battle, its hull scorched and scarred. The Krex flagship had been disabled, its crew either dead or in custody. Most of the Alliance saw this as a chance to breathe. Repair crews worked, medics moved through the wounded, and tactical officers prepared reports for high command. Humans didn't join in the rest. They didn't rest at all. Instead, they gathered in small, quiet groups, speaking in low voices that carried an edge Yarn had never heard before. These weren't warriors celebrating victory. These were hunters, who had smelled blood when the Krex had attacked. They hadn't just come for ships. They had targeted human colonies. One of those colonies had been Icarus Station, a civilian hub floating at the edge of Alliance space. The Krex hadn't destroyed it for military gain. They had done it to make a point. Thousands of families had been there. Now they were gone. Yarn learned the details in fragments, burned-out habitat rings, drifting wreckage, signals that went silent mid-transmission. He saw the faces of human soldiers when they received the news, and it made his chest tighten. There was no shouting, no rage-filled speeches. Just an icy, focused silence. The next morning, without waiting for official orders, the human fleet moved. Their ships left dock with no fanfare, vanishing into hyperspace on vectors Alliance command hadn't even authorized. Yarn, assigned to a human strike group as a liaison, found himself aboard the Resolute, a battlecruiser with a reputation for speed and aggression. Captain Marave, the human in command, stood on the bridge with her hands clasped behind her back. Her voice was calm when she spoke, but her eyes carried something far more dangerous than calm. "We don't defend anymore," she said. "We end this." The mission was simple in words, impossible in execution. Strike deep into Krex territory, bypass their outer defenses, and cripple their core war production. This wasn't the kind of war the Alliance ever fought. But the humans weren't fighting an Alliance war. They were fighting a human one. When the fleet emerged from hyperspace, they didn't find open space. They arrived in the middle of the Krex industrial belt, a vast web of shipyards, munitions factories, and supply stations orbiting a blood-red star. Krex defense fleets were already there, their numbers massive. But numbers didn't seem to slow the humans. The Resolute dove straight into the heart of the enemy lines, its railguns firing in rapid bursts, tearing through Krex frigates before they could form a shield wall. Smaller human corvettes darted between massive enemy cruisers, dropping fusion charges that detonated with blinding light. The Krex fought with discipline. But discipline meant little when your enemy didn't fight by the rules. Human strike teams boarded factories mid-production, sabotaging power cores and overloading reactors. Others hacked into manufacturing controls, causing Krex weapons to explode on their own assembly lines. Through it all, Yarn moved with the boarding crews witnessing up close what made humans so feared when truly provoked. They didn't waste a single movement. They didn't kill for cruelty, but they dismantled everything in their path with ruthless efficiency. At one point, Yarn found himself standing in the control tower of a Krex shipyard as it burned from the inside. Outside the observation window, human ships moved like shadows, through fire, cutting through the industrial belt with terrifying precision. It wasn't war anymore. It was an execution. By the time the humans pulled back, the Krek's industrial network was in ruins. Factories gone, shipyards silent, supply lines severed. The humans left nothing the enemy could use to rebuild quickly. Back aboard the resolute, Yaren overheard a transmission sent across human channels only. "This is the cost of touching our people." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Somewhere in the Krek's high command, Yaren knew there would be silence, the kind that comes when an enemy realizes they might not survive the war they started. And yet, deep in his bones, he felt something else. The humans weren't done. The Krek's home sectors had never known fear. For generations, their fleets had been the hammer that shattered worlds, their armies the storm that no one could withstand. But now, something had changed. Something had cracked. It began with whispers. Civilian freighters vanishing without trace. Entire garrison fleets going dark within hours of reporting contact. Supply convoys destroyed so cleanly that there was nothing left but drifting debris and frozen corpses. Every surviving witness told the same story. Humans. On the Resolute, Yaren read intercepted Krek's transmissions. They no longer spoke of victory or glory. They spoke of survival. Even their most seasoned commanders hesitated before engaging human forces, knowing the risk. But fear wasn't enough for the humans. They wanted the Krek's to break, completely, Captain Mara. Vey stood in the war room, a star map glowing before her. Each red pin marked a Krek's stronghold. One by one, those pins were turning black. The humans weren't following a pattern that made sense to anyone else. They struck deep, far from the front, hitting places no sane strategist would risk. "This is the moment," Vey said, her voice like ice. "We push until they snap. And when they snap, we don't stop." The plan was dangerous, bordering on suicidal. Hit the Krek's most secure system, the Kara Nexus. A fortress star guarded by their oldest and most heavily armed fleets. Even the Alliance wouldn't touch it. But the humans weren't the Alliance. The fleet jumped in under the shadow of a dying red giant. The Krek's defense grid activated instantly, thousands of guns locking on. Their warships moved in massive, coordinated formations, a wall of steel and fire, and then the humans broke them. The Resolute led the charge. Accelerating straight into the wall, railguns hammering, human destroyers didn't stop to exchange fire. They cut through, flying. Inside the enemy formations, where the Krek's couldn't bring their heavy weapons to bear, boarding torpedoes smashed into Krek's flagships. Delivering strike teams who fought like demons in the corridors, Yaren was with one of those teams. Plasma rifle in hand, when they stormed the command bridge of a Krek's battlecruiser. The Krek's captain fought to the last, but it didn't matter. The humans disabled the ship's weapons, turned its guns on its own fleet, and moved on before reinforcements could arrive. Across the system, chaos spread. Krek ships collided as human attacks came from impossible angles. Factories went dark. Command channels jammed. The Krek's had always relied on discipline and order. But against human unpredictability, that order crumbled. Why Yaren saw it? The shift. The moment fear turned to panic, Krek's ships began retreating without orders. Others refused to answer distress calls. The Kara Nexus, the beating heart of Krek's strength, was bleeding out before his eyes. By the time the humans withdrew, the system was in flames. The Krek's had lost more in a single day than in years of war. Back on the bridge, Captain Vey didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply gave one order: send the message. Across Krek's space, human signals pulsed into every channel. You are not safe. Not here. Not anywhere. For the first time in living memory, the Krek's empire was not feared. It was afraid. And Yaren knew exactly what came next. Humans didn't stop when their enemy ran. They followed. The galaxy was quiet, too quiet. Not the peace of safety, but the silence of something holding its breath. Every major power, Every neutral observer, every distant colony, all were watching the same thing. The humans were moving. The Kreks had retreated farther than anyone thought possible. Whole sectors abandoned. Border fortresses left unmanned. But the humans did not slow down. Their ships were not returning home. They were hunting. Why? Aaron stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring at the star chart. The Kreks' homeworld, a jewel of green and silver, sat at the center. No enemy had reached it in over 500 years. The Kreks believed its defenses to be unbreakable planetary shields layered over energy domes, orbital rings bristling with weapons, entire fleets waiting in perfect formation. It was a fortress built on the belief that fear would always keep invaders away, but fear no longer worked. Captain Marave's voice cut through the tension. This is the end. No half measures. No negotiations. They will learn what happens when they push us too far. The human fleet jumped in. The sky over the Kreks' homeworld turned to fire. Dreadnoughts unleashed their main guns, tearing apart orbital rings like paper. Missile swarms poured from human cruisers, weaving through defense grids and slamming into planetary shields. The shields flared and cracked. Kreks' fleet surged forward in desperate counterattack, but it was too late. Human ships cut through them, boarding crews carving through corridors in brutal close-range combat. On the ground, drop pods slammed into cities, disgorging soldiers who fought with a ferocity that seemed impossible. Yarn was with the first wave. Streets burned around him. Kreks soldiers shouted orders, but their formations collapsed as human units moved faster, striking from every direction. Every building became a battlefield. In the Palace District, Captain Vey herself led the assault. Kreks' leadership had locked themselves in a fortified command chamber, believing they could outlast the attack. They didn't understand.
The humans
Weren't there to siege, they were there to end. Explosives tore open the chamber doors. Vey walked in through the smoke, her rifle lowered, but her presence like a blade. The Kreks' high commander stood frozen, his crest trembling. You thought war was a game, Vey said, her voice low and deadly. You thought we were just another opponent. You forgot one thing. She stepped closer, her eyes locking on his. Humans don't stop when they're angry. We finish things. By the time the human fleet withdrew, the Kreks' homeworld was in ruins. Their fleets were gone, their leadership captured or dead. The war was over. Not with a treaty, not with surrender papers, but with total, undeniable defeat. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Humans had shattered every expectation, rewriting the rules of war in a single campaign. And Yaren knew, as the Resolute slipped back into the dark between stars, that the message had been sent loud and clear. If you start a war with humans, you will never decide how it ends.